The battle over Altraxis 3 was not going well. Plasma beams lit up the orbital lanes. Cruisers traded broadside fire with the slow, weighty grace of executioners, and the crackling feedback of destroyed comms relays filled every fleet channel. The Galactic Council's 3rd Expeditionary Force had underestimated the resistance of the Dust Ark separatists. Again. In orbit around the conflict, nestled between 2 asteroid monitors and stubbornly parked well outside the combat zone, floated the HLS Subpoena, a sleek if unimpressive human vessel assigned to non-combat observation duties. Under Galactic Council Charter Appendix 6, Subsection Beta 9, Clause 12.4, humans were permitted to observe GC-sanctioned engagements for the purpose of intercultural tactical development. What that meant in practice was, sit quietly, don't interfere, and try not to break anything. Inside the subpoena, things were quiet. Too quiet. Commander Bellows stood at the bridge viewport, watching a Kralian heavy cruiser explode in graceful, unfortunate spirals. "That's the 4th ship down," she muttered. "Didn't even last through their own opening volley." Across the bridge, the ship's legal officer, Lieutenant Greaves, was calmly sipping tea from a reinforced mug labeled "Lawsuit Pending." He didn't look up. "Technically, their targeting sequence violated interstellar emission standards," he said, almost conversationally. "Improper shield modulation rates. Someone could bring that up." Bellows turned to look at him. "Greaves." "Yes, Commander?" "Can we do the thing?" Greaves blinked slowly, then set his mug down with exaggerated care. "Are you referring to the thing?" Bellows nodded once, firmly. Greaves smiled in the way a carnivore might when spotting a limping herd animal. "I'll need 5 minutes and a torpedo tube." Bellows turned to her helmsman. "Battlefield status?" "GC losses mounting. Outer defense lines compromised. 2 enemy dreadnoughts incoming, 1 holding position flagship class." "Good. Lock on to the flagship," she said. "Targeting solution?" "Ma'am?" "We're going to sue them." In the subpoena's modest launch bay, 2 deckhands stared at the modified courier torpedo with a mixture of reverence and disbelief. It was painted regulation gray, save for the bright orange stripe down the center bearing the words "Service Delivery Legal Priority" in large block letters. Inside were 3 sealed physical copies of a ceasefire petition, a full arbitration request packet, 12 notarized exhibits, and an animated 3D presentation with hover bullet points and voiceover. The torpedo's outer casing also housed a small camera drone and a loudspeaker. "You ever fired one of these before?" one of the deckhands asked. "Nope," said the other. "Didn't even think they were real." They weren't, until Greaves petitioned EarthGov to make them a line item. Inside the bridge, Greaves made the final adjustments. "Commander, activating Article 97.3.12 of the Interstellar Conflict Charter, Tactical Litigation Protocol." A soft ping echoed across the ship's systems. 100 lines of legal precedent began scrolling across internal screens. Bellows glanced over. "Confirmation?" "Article verified. Clauses buried in the GC legal code between environmental dust mitigation during conflict and fleet uniform coloration standards." It's a nightmare to find. Technically, it shouldn't exist, but it does, and we filed it under procedural emergency 5 years ago. "Launch it." "Launching lawsuit." The torpedo shot from the subpoena's launch bay with a small puff of inert gas. It traveled unimpeded through the chaos of battle, its transponder flashing a non-combat delivery code. Most sensors ignored it, assuming it was debris or a broken drone. It impacted the enemy flagship with a soft thunk. The flagship's captain, one Commander Jal, a 4-eyed, tri-mandibled war veteran of the Dust Ark's original uprising, felt the vibration and immediately barked an order for damage report. "No damage, Commander," came the confused reply. It's some kind of pod." The hull camera showed the torpedo's shell opening like a mechanical flower. The camera drone rose up slowly, turning toward the command deck with a steady red recording light. Then the speaker crackled. "You have been served. it said cheerfully in 6 languages. The camera deployed a hard-copy document tube. A small propulsion unit gently pressed it against the flagship's hull window with a wet thap. There was a long silence on the bridge. "What?" Jal finally said, not as a question but as an expression of soul-deep bewilderment. "It appears we've been served a lawsuit," the flagship's communications officer said. "From the humans." Jal stared at the document pressed to the window. It was visibly signed in blue ink. There were even glitter flecks in the header. He turned to his legal officer, a long-suffering separatist bureaucrat in full body armor. "Is this real?" The legal officer's voice was small and filled with dread. "Unfortunately, yes." Far from the chaos on the bridge of the subpoena, Greaves sipped his tea again and smiled. "Service confirmed," he said. "Now the fun begins." Aboard the Galactic Council flagship Integrity's Wrath, Admiral Nethin was midway through shouting orders when her aide gingerly handed her a data pad. "It's from the human vessel," he said, antennae twitching. "We're in combat," she snapped. "Yes, Admiral. And yet the human vessel has submitted an official arbitration claim under Article 97.3.12. Nethin squinted. "That's not a real number." "It is, ma'am. It's buried under Fleet Code Section 17, Conflict Mitigation and Nonviolent Recourse, Subsection J." "Subsection J?" "Yes. J as in judicial." Nethin stared. "You're telling me in the middle of a siege, the humans have filed a lawsuit?" "Yes, Admiral. And we are legally required to acknowledge it." She looked around the bridge. Half the fleet was smoldering, damage reports scrolled in red across holo displays, and the enemy flagship had just stopped, not powered down, just paused. Like a child caught mid-cookie theft. "Does that mean we have to stop firing?" "Yes, ma'am." "Until the matter is resolved in arbitration." A long silence followed, then quietly, "Someone put a plasma round through that charter the next time we print it." In the combat zone, the chaos settled into a surreal, bureaucratic stillness. Missiles that had already launched were allowed to finish their arc. Lasers were powered down with awkward timing. A separatist cruiser drifted past a GC corvette, both visibly on fire, both pretending not to notice the other. On the subpoena, Greaves was already preparing his arbitration entry. He now wore a crisp black suit, a silver tie, and reading glasses he absolutely did not need. His portable arbitration pod, technically a modified escape shuttle with wood paneling, was gently pushed from the docking bay. The pod hovered between fleets in what the humans cheerfully referred to as the litigation buffer zone. A camera drone orbited the pod slowly, broadcasting the hearing in high definition. "Initiating formal proceedings under interstellar judicial arbitration, Emergency Protocol 97.3.12, Greaves said smoothly. "Greaves, Lieutenant. Bar certified in 12 sectors, representing humanity, presenting to the Council-aligned forces and whatever dusty legality the Separatists cling to." The enemy legal officer, Magistrate Kerr, appeared on the split screen. He wore traditional armor, ceremonial robes, and the unmistakable haunted look of someone who just realized law school would not prepare him for this. "I formally protest these proceedings," Kerr growled. "This is an abusive process." "You're absolutely right," Greaves replied cheerfully. "But that doesn't make it illegal." "Proceed," Kerr muttered. Greaves launched into his opening arguments like a showman with a grudge. "Your siege violates zoning regulation 441.8. Orbit-to-surface military enforcement requires a permit filed through Sectoral Zoning Agency Alpha 5. None was received. In addition, your plasma bombardment trajectory crossed into a civilian-aligned orbital corridor. Case precedent Vernick v. Outer Transit Authority, if you'd care to look it up." Kerr blinked. Greaves continued without mercy. "Let's not forget the environmental impact. Altraxis 3 is technically a Category 7 protected microbiome. Every one of your debris fields violates the Planetary Clean Atmosphere Initiative. I'm estimating 3.2 million credits in fines, not including punitive damages." "You're making this up!" Am I? Greaves transmitted a 300-page document, complete with annotations, footnotes, and at least 3 references to long-lost colony jurisprudence involving invasive moss. Kerr paused. That last one is from the asteroid belt mining dispute of 2017. Still precedent, Greaves said. Also applicable under orbital salvage law. Back on the subpoena, while the fleets idled and lawyers argued, the crew got to work. A damage control team patched the starboard hull with emergency plating, listed in the arbitration filing as structural integrity stabilization for impartial observation integrity. 3 shuttles arrived carrying legal observation units, which happened to include a suspicious number of Marines in suits and sunglasses. A comms officer quietly uploaded a fake zoning update to GC FleetNet, rerouting an entire battle group away from the area for legal neutrality enforcement. The aliens noticed. They just couldn't do anything about it. Inside Integrity's wrath, Admiral Nethin was pacing like a warhound in a cage. "We're being played," she said, watching as human reinforcements docked with the subpoena under the cover of non-aggressive procedural flags. "Yes, Admiral," her aide replied. "But they're playing by the rules." That's the worst part. Several GC officers had already collapsed from administrative strain. One had filed a personal ethics complaint against reality itself. On screen, Greaves paused to sip water, then smiled. As a gesture of compromise, humanity proposes a ceasefire until the Council's Legal Oversight Committee can complete full review. Standard timeline is 7 to 10 years. Kerr's eye twitched. "You can't be serious." "I'm always serious," Greaves said, "especially when I'm winning." The arbitration paused. Kerr demanded a recess to review case law. Greaves used the break to adjust his tie and upload a legal meme to the GC Judicial Archive titled, "Don't start a war you can't sue your way out of." The camera drone hovered a little closer. He smiled at it. "Next round's gonna be fun." The recess lasted 20 minutes. When the screen reactivated, Magistrate Kerr looked like a man who had read too much and slept too little. His ceremonial robes were rumpled. His mandibles twitched. He had, at some point, removed his armored pauldrons and replaced them with a neck pillow. Greaves, by contrast, looked freshly caffeinated and annoyingly chipper. He'd changed ties. This one had tiny gavel patterns and changed colors depending on the viewing angle. "Are you ready to proceed?" he asked cheerfully. Kerr sighed. "I have reviewed the filings. While your claims are legally aggressive, overly interpretive, and, frankly, bordering on parody, they are technically valid. I'll take that as a compliment. The Separatist Alliance is willing to consider a resolution if it prevents us from further entanglement in this farce." "Excellent!" Greaves leaned forward with the kind of expression normally reserved for chess masters about to pull off something smug and irreversible. "Humanity proposes a formal ceasefire, mutually binding, pending full review by the Galactic Council Legal Oversight Committee." Kerr's face twitched. "You mean the review board that hasn't met in over a decade and currently has a 4-year backlog?" "Correct," Greaves said, nodding. "The one whose chair died 2 years ago and has not been replaced?" "Also correct." Kerr's gaze narrowed. "And you expect us to honor this agreement while that committee deliberates?" "Why, yes," Greaves said almost gently. "Because if you don't, then all this glorious documentation becomes actionable, and we would have no choice but to initiate a follow-up case for breach of peace arbitration compliance." He paused, then added helpfully, "and possibly wrongful orbital trauma." There was a long silence. "We accept," Kerr finally muttered. "Lovely," Greaves smiled. "I'll transmit the confirmation packet. Don't worry, I've simplified the language down to a mere 87 pages. Back on the subpoena, Commander Bellows sat in her chair watching the proceedings with a drink in hand and a visible mix of admiration and mild concern. Did he just win the siege with a cease and desist letter? "Yes, ma'am," replied her XO, without firing a shot. Bellows exhaled slowly. "Fantastic. Remind me to write him up for conduct unbecoming a naval officer." "Understood." The ceasefire transmission pinged across fleet systems. All combat operations immediately halted, pending judicial clarification. The separatist ships began backing off with what could only be described as dignified retreat, except the one corvette that accidentally hit a legal buoy and had to file a property damage waiver before it could leave. GC fleet forces reclaimed orbit over Altraxis 3. The planet's strategic positions were re-established. Orbital authority was handed back to the planetary governor, who signed the paperwork in a daze and requested a transfer to somewhere less surreal, like a black hole. The subpoena's systems logged the mission as successfully resolved through alternative engagement methodology. Greaves returned to the bridge still wearing his tie, now loosened slightly, and holding a celebration donut. Bellows stared at him. "You're impossible." "Legally speaking," Greaves said around a bite, "I'm an asset." Later that week, the Galactic Council held an emergency closed-session review. It was the fifth one, that quarter prompted by human operational irregularities. After 14 hours of heated debate, caffeine injections, and at least one ambassador threatening to defect to a silent monastery, the Council passed Amendment 62A, which read, Article 97.3.12 may only be invoked during live combat if accompanied by dual notary confirmation, one of whom must be certified sane by a neutral species authority. The vote passed unanimously, with the exception of the human delegation, who abstained on the grounds that the phrase, certified sane, was culturally discriminatory. 2 weeks later, EarthGov quietly announced the formation of Legal Warfare Doctrine Unit 1, a specialized task group trained in high-risk battlefield arbitration and procedural conflict suppression. Recruitment requirements included JD equivalent, tactical awareness, and a flair for the dramatic. A final memo was found in the GC fleet logs 3 days after the incident. It was short. Subject: Article 97.3.12, Emergency Use Protocols. Body: please, for the love of the stars, never let the humans do that again. Attachment: Charter Revision Draft 7.1 Hidden Footer, encrypted. Subpoena wins again. Regards, Lieutenant Greaves.